All right, welcome everybody. Nick's here back again with the Expat Files, and today I have a really special guest, somebody who I think is going to be important to a lot of people's lives going forward. This is an enormously valuable and important thing to know about, an enormously valuable service that my friend Richard, and you say your last name Bueckert?
It's actually Bickert, but
Bickert.
no one gets it right. So
No one
just
gets it
the
right
way
the
it
first time.
sounds is good.
I didn't either. So Richard and I met actually through my attorney recently, but I know the kind of work he does. And Richard actually has a hell of a story for us today. Today we're talking about asset protection, but specific kind of asset protection. The best way, really, quite frankly, the only way to make yourself actually bulletproof against the biggest threat that, at least if you think through the scenario that we are entering into and that we're already in, right, that is actually happening. It's no longer a prediction. The things that are unfolding now make this kind of asset protection probably the only thing. I am not aware of any other asset protection that can actually make you off limits to your own government, which is your number one threat. And so that's a big part of our thinking here at Expat Files. Richard, welcome, first of all, and thanks for being on. Appreciate it. Great to see you.
Thanks, Dane. It was a pleasure to be invited. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share my story and what I've learned over the years. And yeah,
Outstanding.
and you're absolutely right. It is the way things are going, especially in Western countries right now. It is more important than ever that as it everything kind of descends into this socialist I deserve what you have mentality, that you cover yourself, because it's getting worse, and it's going to keep getting worse. It's not going to get
There's
any
no
better.
sign. Yeah, I mean, the trend is now clearly established and clearly in motion, but there is no sign that any of this is going to let up. So let's just start off with a very basic explanation of asset protection trusts. We'll distinguish one from the other here as we go along, but talk about asset protection as you and I understand it. Talk about, especially, and if you want to sort of work your way up to deem disposition for our Canadian viewers, you told me something really interesting about the situation for people in Canada, and people should know this because I think it's a good case in point for what you're really up against.
Yeah. So the whole premise behind a trust is that, from the asset protection perspective, is that they can't take away from you what you don't own. So when you put something into a trust, and specifically here we're talking irrevocable trusts, because a revocable trust does not provide asset protection. Because if you can revoke it, that means that you can get ordered by the court to
That's right.
tear it apart. So we're always talking irrevocable. And as and again, as things get worse, you want to have the vehicles that you need to put your assets into, to have that trust protection, but still maintain control over it. And that's where the LLCs come in underneath it. But the key is to get it so that it's out of your hands, so that they can't take it from you.
That's good. I mean, that really, we'll get into the particulars here so people at least have some kind of mental model of what we're talking about. But asset protection trusts are ways to take things off your balance sheet. I mean, principle number one, and my mentor and our friend Rob taught me this right up front. If you don't own it, it can't actually be taken from you because you don't own it, right? And so what a trust does is takes assets off your balance sheet, like this is no longer Tane's precious metals account, right? For example, it actually legally it belongs to another entity. And then the way you structure it so that you benefit from your assets. So then if you're a listener and you're hearing that and you go, wait a second, I just gave up my wealth. No, the way it's structured legally is you still have ownership, you still have control over the assets, but the trust is that now the legal owner. Do I have that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's that's absolutely it in a nutshell. It's
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the reason that's important is,
well, the reason that's important is that if you get litigated against, whether that be through any kind of a tort claim, or in my case, the reason for me learning all this was because of two divorces, and essentially, if it is in a way that the court can have jurisdiction over it, they can take it. And there are numerous. Right now there's quite a lot of case law where courts are overriding domestic trust protections, and they're just simply saying, we don't care if you have a trust in Nevada, for example, you're in California, and we're taking your stuff, and they seize it, and that's all there is to it.
Is that right? You're hearing about case law where trusts are being essentially broken open with increasing frequency. Well, I mean, it exactly makes the point that I want listeners to understand. And so I do want you to tell people your story. I want folks to know why you have so much expertise in this. It's actually a horrible story. But this idea that, like, look, if your assets are within the reach of whether it's an ambulance chasing kind of lawyer, maybe you're in a high risk profession like medicine, for example, or the government of the US or Canada, depending on where you live, wants to make life very unpleasant for you because you said something they didn't like, or you voted the wrong way, or God knows, right? What excuse could possibly come down the pipe? There is no place that your wealth and valuables are actually safe and out of reach inside the system and inside the borders of your home country. I think that's a correct assessment. Have I got that right?
Yeah, and a lot of times, and so one of the recent clients that we talked to, through no fault of their own, and it was through the fault of an employee that was saying things that they ought not to have said without the knowledge of the owners, ended up catching the attention of the SEC.
Yeah.
And the next thing they know is all of the assets of the business and her personally are now frozen. And this is without being convicted of anything, but it's because of the suspicion that they were doing something untowards. And the problem was that because all of her assets were held domestically, she couldn't even hire a lawyer.
Yeah, which is like the greatest horror story you could possibly encounter.
And so what happens now is you essentially are getting extorted by the government because they're holding all the cards and they are preventing you. Like, sure, you can get a public defender, but I don't think I would want to rely on a public defender when I'm going against the SEC.
No, and quite frankly, it wouldn't matter what kind of, how much money you spent on lawyers. If the government's going to make your life miserable, you've already lost. By the time it goes to the level where you're paying lawyers and all the rest, your life is really ruined in that kind of scenario. And whether it's civil asset forfeiture, right? There was a story I read, a gentleman he deals in a lot of cash, got pulled over, had 50 grand, I forget the exact amount in cash. It was just confiscated. Because you're not supposed to have that much cash. You look guilty of doing something. What he did was a legitimate business. He wasn't running drugs or, peddling children somewhere. It wasn't anything illegal, but he had his money confiscated and then had to fight like a dog for years just to get it back. And of course, I mean, did he get it back? No, because he had to hire lawyers and go through the whole thing and all the rest. So there's really now very dangerous laws on the books, aren't there? About, like you just said, I'm a business owner, my employee said something, I don't have control of what they say, but we all believe that there's still freedom of speech, right? And obviously that's becoming more and more naive. But somebody says something and somehow now you're on the hook to the government and they have any amount of money, any amount of weapons and tools to come after you. And there's really only one way that you put yourself in it. What we call here at Expat Files, I mean, this is the piece that makes you bulletproof, which is why, I wanted to have you on. I want to make this point to people so clear, which is there is only one kind of asset protection that actually protects you from the biggest threat of all, which is the political risk inside North America right now.
Right.
And so tell them a little bit just about your story. I mean, we don't have to, I don't mean to dredge it up, but I know you're a real expert on this. I know you had some experiences that told you, like, no, I need to get really sharp about foreign asset trusts. Go through that quickly and then tell Canadians about deemed disposition and sort of how the laws can be stacked against you.
Yeah. So Essentially, I went through divorce number one, and that divorce was I always refer to that one as the gift that kept on giving. And every time I did anything that created income, I was getting served for something else. Either it was, I'm the allegation that I was somehow not declaring income and not paying the right amount, and through that process, and at the time I was now remarried, I went to my corporate Canadian lawyer and I said, I want you to structure, because we're starting new businesses and investing in real estate and other things. I said, I need you to structure my affairs so that my first wife will not be able to attack or take anything away from me. Because at this point, we were long since divorced, but the litigation kept coming.
Yeah. Right.
And my corporate lawyer said, hey, no problem. We can do this. We can structure, we can create different corps. We can, these ones will be in your current wife's name. They will hold, all your assets, your buildings, your et cetera. All the operating businesses will be in your name. And being naive and not knowing what to ask, I just said, yeah, okay, let's get this done. So it was great. And it did the job perfectly. What it also did was it set it up so that when I ended my second marriage, I essentially, I hamstrung myself. And to give you an idea of the extent of that, the day I left, my now estranged wife became my commercial landlord. And when you're running a multi-million-dollar business,
yep.
Out of a property that the adjacent business to us, which was a very large construction company, they had been trying to buy our property for years. And now I've got my ex-wife being courted by my neighbors to sell the property, which is eventually what happened. So I had made an agreement with her because we had purchased the property during our marriage. So there was certain portions of that would be considered a marital asset. And I used that as part of the down payment, leveraged everything I had to buy this property, sent the money over on a Friday morning, and I got a call from my lawyer Friday afternoon. And I remember his response almost verbatim. It was, hey, I got some bad news. Let me read what the other lawyer sent. We are returning your check. Our client, your client's ex-wife, has decided that they will be selling the property to the neighboring construction business instead of your client for the sum of $100,000 less, and you have 30 days to vacate the premise.
Yeah. So you get kicked out of your own property, basically.
I got kicked out of my own property. There is absolutely no way on earth you can move a business, because that was industrial coatings. You cannot move a business like that in 30 days.
No.
You destroyed the business, destroyed the wealth, and it was a pure vindictive play.
Yeah. I'm actually sorry that we told that to the audience. I should not.
Yeah,
my heart is
history.
on the ground for you. But yes, I mean, this is the scenario where, again, the legal shenanigans that are allowed to go on, regardless. I mean, whether it's a divorce or whether it's a court case, or whether the SEC wants to come after you, or whether the Canadian government wants to get you, if you don't have the correct legal structure set up, you're as good as a sitting duck to any attorneys who will spend any amount of money to just keep coming after you. And so this is the point that I want to drive home to people. Like, if you don't understand the importance of a trust, and here's the really important point: the difference between a domestic trust and a foreign trust. The difference is, Richard, just explain to people, like in my sort of peasant understanding of this. Right, a foreign trust really matters because it puts one extra layer of protection, which is you now have the protection from another sovereign government.
Right.
And that is the difference, right? That makes all the difference.
Yeah. So once all this happened, I thought, all right, I need to arrange my affairs going forward so that this never happens again. And the trust issue came up immediately, that if I don't own it, it can't be taken from me. So I started looking at Canadian trusts. And one of the things that came up after that was I came across this clause for the majority of them that is called a 21-year deemed disposition.
Deemed disposition. If you're Canadian, write this down.
So essentially what that means is if I buy a property today, let's say the property is worth $500,000, and I put that property into the trust. Let's say in 21 years, I still have the property. I haven't sold it. It's still in the trust. But I'm required by law to reassess the value of that property. So now let's say it's $1.5 million, which, in 21 years is possible.
So you're up $1 million. Exactly.
Yeah. So I've got a $1 million capital gain.
Yep.
Now, with the 21-year deemed disposition, it resets the value of that asset from its purchase price to the current value, and the gain is now a taxable event. So I now have to pay the tax on the gain, even though I still own the asset.
For a property that you still own and maybe living in, right? But now you have to cough up, what is the percentage on the?
Yeah, it depends on the assets and depends on your capital gain situation. But you could still be, it's not unrealistic to think you got to write a check for a couple $100,000.
Yeah, right. You got to
for an asset that you haven't sold.
Capital gains in the U.S. about 20%. So imagine paying $200,000 for a property that you still own, you haven't sold, you haven't realized any kind of gain, but you have to pay the tax on it anyway.
And so, it's essentially a wealth tax, is what it is.
A wealth tax, exactly.
They want your money. That's so.
And they're gonna get it. I just came from a presentation a week or so ago in Panama, and the whole theme, the theme was actually hard assets and why it's important to own stuff like real estate, like real things right now. Going into this kind of situation that we're going into seems to make sense, right? Commodities and things like this are very cheap. And they're the cheapest they've ever been relative to other assets. And so the whole point of, look, the debt that, especially the US, right? But for Canadian people too, it's going to be just as bad. The debt is mathematically unpayable. We're well beyond an actual financial Rubicon where there is no possibility of anything except further money printing and then eventually, currency collapse, default, right? However long the whole charade is going to continue, it's very, very predictable. And the one point that the keynote speaker made, the host of the event made, was you're about to see some very, very, very creative forms of taxation, because the money has to come from somewhere, and the people that it's likely to come from. I mean, again, if you're a betting person and you're just playing probabilities, it's got to come from the middle class. The middle class has no legal protection. Nobody's going to stand up and protect them. The rich have accountants and lawyers and lobbyists, and they buy politicians to make sure that their money is safe. And even if they lose some of it, what's the big deal, right? They got billions more. And the poor are sort of cemented in place because they're the recipients of a lot of government largesse, and that's how we sort of keep them from rioting, right? But the middle class has none of that. What the middle class has is wealth with no other way to protect it. And that's why I had you on the show, because there is actually one way to protect it. So like, if you could rewind and actually you knew about a foreign asset protection trust, you could have actually given a middle finger to wife number one, wife number two, right? All of the lawyers, all the shenanigans that went on, all of that time for you. And also in the scenario that, and Rob has told me there's case law. He doesn't like to talk too much about it, because probably, yes, right, there's probably legal reasons that he can't disclose too much. But when the government comes after you, there's really only one way where you can actually get them to back off. And that is, look, these assets are in a foreign trust. If you want to raise hell and go after them, you can, but you got to put up a lot of money. You got to go to the foreign country. You got to abide by their rules, right? It sets up an incredible barrier, maybe the only barrier that's going to get the US government and the Canadian government, or whatever, wherever you're watching this, whatever jurisdiction you live in, to back off and actually leave you alone, because it won't be worth it to them. And so this matters right now more than ever because of the situation we're going into. I expect a lot of legal shenanigans, and I also just expect taxation to just get insanely out of control. Yeah.
The interesting thing about this, and I was watching a presentation by a lawyer who's in the US who does not talk about offshore, and he's specifically talking about domestic asset protection. And the term he used repeatedly was security through obscurity. And it sounds great. But what he's really saying is we're using domestic vehicles to hide things.
Yeah.
We're not.
Let me know how that works for you. Yeah.
At no point did he ever say we're using domestic security to actually protect it. We're using domestics to hide it, to make it hard for them to find. Because their theory was if they can't find it,
they can find it.
You appear to be have no assets, so they are likely to leave you alone if it doesn't look like you have assets.
Yeah, which is and so what your reaction to that was what?
Well, I honestly I chuckled, and
exactly.
Great. I mean, so if you want to, if you want to drive in a 20-year-old car that's rusting out and make it look like you're poor, that might work. But if you're going to work hard to have wealth, you want to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, what's the point of being wealthy, right? If you have to hide it, right? The other thing that makes me think of, and this is also important for listeners to understand, like there's no such thing as like Swiss bank accounts and unnumbered bank accounts, and you're not hiding wealth from anybody. Everything is traceable electronically. When people contact me, if I even get a whiff that anybody wants to do anything even the least bit questionable, like I'm out, right? I'm not working with you. I'm not interested in that. Nobody watching this should be interested in that. You're not. There's legal ways to do this that are so much cheaper and so much better and smarter in the long run anyway. But the idea that the government can't find your money, that's insane, right? In the modern era, they'll find everything. They'll find stuff that you didn't even know, right? You had stashed away. So forget it.
Yeah. And that is one of the questions that we get a lot. They'll say, well, if I set up this trust in Belize, is it taxable? Well, really, it doesn't matter if it is or not, because you're taxable. You're living, you are living in, if you're living in the US, you're a US citizen. It doesn't matter where you live, you have to declare it to the US.
Yeah.
If you're Canadian, as long, like I'm in Canada right now, I'm a Canadian tax resident, and I am taxed on my global income, no matter where it comes from.
There you go.
Now, are there ways for residential tax citizens like me to get out of that? Yeah, but it means physically leaving the country.
Yes, there are.
It's not as simple as saying I'm out for 183 days, I'm not paying anymore. That doesn't work. You have to you have to go to, in our case, Canada Revenue, give them their form, show them that you've substantively left the country, and they will then say, we grant you to leave. It's not like I can declare it. They have to grant me permission to not pay me.
That's how the system is set up. And by the way, you better believe that they have the long arms to get you if you try to play around with this. Full disclosure here, neither Richard or I are tax experts or financial advisors. None of this is to be taken as individual kind of advice. And obviously you should seek out the kind of expertise that you need, whether that's for tax reasons or for, right. But neither Richard or I are big fans of, pretending even to try to hide anything from the government. That's very, very foolish. You're going to end up in deep, deep trouble if you do that. And the good news is you don't have to do it, right? For very, very little money, you can make yourself bulletproof to your own government, to ex-wives, to, right? It doesn't matter who's coming after you. Obviously you need to still play by the tax rules and everything else, but moving your money into an offshore trust is really the single best and probably only way that you're going to make yourself really actually bulletproof to the people who want to get you most. So I think I don't want to, we have some stories here, but let's just move on to like what goes into a trust. So say I'm a person, I've done well, I've worked hard, I've saved up $1 million, $10 million. What goes into my trust? How do I do it? Like what's the process by which these things go in there? Can you explain the structure and the process a little bit?
Yeah, and that was the part that took me the longest time to wrap my head around when I was looking at restructuring my affairs. So in my trust, and again, like you said, it's not legal, financial, or medical advice. This is just how I set up mine. Yeah, especially not medical. I want to cover everything. That the only thing that is in my trust is the membership interest in my LLC, and that is it. So there is nothing. So that people understand. So you form an LLC, and that's also offshore. Correct. And the LLC goes into the trust, and all the assets
bank accounts, titles to, a collectible car, a piece of art, right, precious metals, real estate. All those things are now titled not in Richard's name, but in the name of the LLC, which is underneath the trust.
Correct.
That's it. That's it. So the actual process of doing it really is nothing more than just, okay, well, I have a bank account, or this is where my brokerage is. I'm going to take it out of my name and I'm going to put it into the name of whatever I call my LLC, right? Tate's LLC in, right, such and such trust.
Yeah. So the LLC, like my LLC, is located in Belize as well. Everything else that I have is for anything that's not in Belize. So, for example, for everything that is owned in the U.S. is in a U.S. LLC. That LLC is owned by Belize.
So you can put LLCs into other LLCs. In other words, I have one main LLC in my trust, and I take my assets, I put them into LLCs, and then I put that LLC into the trust LLC.
Yeah, everything flows through. So there's no anything that's in a U.S. LLC will flow through all the way to me. So I still declare all the tax and all the income as normal based on my residence here, and that's totally legit. As far as the paperwork goes for taxation, it's 3 pieces of paper. Takes my accountant 20 to 25 minutes per year to prepare. That's it. It's done.
Wow. And do you know what those forms are? I can put them in the show notes here.
I can look them up for you. I don't remember the numbers.
Okay. No, that's fine.
He just says, here it is, and sign it. So I sign it.
Yeah, perfect. But I can get that from you later, and we'll stick that in the notes because it's valuable for people to know. But I mean, just the fact that, like, look, you still tell the government, you have to tell them whatever you're legally required to tell them.
Right.
But you shouldn't tell them more than that. But the 3 pieces of paper you got to fill out take a half an hour every year. Right. So there's all kinds of reasons to be doing this, right? The biggest one we've already covered. Now, I won't keep beating that horse, but the most important thing you can do at a time like this that we're going into, if you've done well, if you've worked hard, if you've been productive, and you've made money, and you've saved up you got some family wealth, right? You have to understand that you're a target right now for the government, for anybody who wants to come after you, because things are going to, my expectation is that things are going to get kind of nuts. I mean, again, the whole debt ceiling charade and all the rest, all that is a decision between the 2 parties in Congress, how much they're going to steal from the middle class, right? And continue to make the future generations pay off this debt, which is not going to happen. And so where is the money going to come from? Where is it going to come from? In the United States, they passed a bill. They're hiring 87,000 new IRS agents. And, right, they were very open that they're going to arm them. How many of them will be armed, we don't know, but they're not giving them guns because they want to come have coffee with you. They're coming to get your money. That's what they're coming for. And so if your money's not there when they try to get it, or it technically doesn't even belong to you, then they have to go through this whole rigmarole to try to do anything to pierce your trust and get a hold of your assets. And that actually means going through an entire other country's legal system with a bunch of cash that they got to put up front to try to if they're going to come really break your balls. It's a big deal legally. It's way more trouble than it's actually worth to come after you once you've already put your assets in a foreign trust. You mentioned Belize. Why Belize?
Belize, when you look at the structures that Belize has put in place for offshore, for people like us. So before I did all this, I took the time to actually read through the International Limited Liability Companies Act of Belize, the actual legislation. I've read it. And there are things in there that are intentionally designed to make it, if not extraordinarily onerous, virtually impossible for someone to litigate against you. So as an example, so if you wanted to come after me for, say, $10,000, first off, you have to travel to Belize to file in person. You cannot do it electronically. When you get to Belize and you want to file, you now have to go to the court and you have to deposit with the court a bond in cash, not a check, not a transfer, in cash, in the amount of either half the amount that you're suing me for, which is $5,000, or $50,000 US, whichever is greater.
Boom.
So if you want to sue me for 10 grand, you got to go down and you got to put 50 grand on the table. If you want to sue me for $1 million, you got to put $500,000 on the table.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to go through an airport carrying $50,000 in cash.
It's a big problem.
If you went through customs, they'd arrest you. Yeah. They don't know what they'd arrest you with besides you're illegally transporting too much cash. But now you got to, it's like you said, it's civil asset forfeiture. They're going to take the money. Now you got to prove it's yours.
That's right.
So first off, getting to Belize is virtually impossible. Is it unsurmountable? No, it can be done, but it's very, very difficult. Yeah. Then the second thing that happens is, if as soon as you file, and again, this is in the legislation in Belize, as the manager of my LLC, I am required by law, as soon as I come under any kind of duress event, that I need to resign as manager, which now means I have to step away and I have to appoint an emergency manager. So even if you get a court order that orders me to do something, I'm not managing the LLC anymore. Yeah. I have no power to do anything.
It's like a kill switch on. Yeah, exactly.
It's a dead man switch. Is exactly what it is.
That's right. It's dead man. Yep.
And the other thing that we've done with ours is we put numerous clauses in our trust so that if any of this happens, the first thing that is required for the trustee to do is to move the trust to a new jurisdiction.
Move the trust to, yeah.
So it's now going to go, the next step will be the Cook Islands. So there are all the legal provisions are in place to keep my assets 2 to 3 steps ahead of whoever's litigating against me. And in the case of a government, and there have been cases where the US and Canada have looked at litigating against people in Belize, but they have decided not to. And the reason they don't talk about is they know that if they went forward and tried to litigate, there's a very, very high probability they're going to lose. And once that information became public, it would open a floodgate. So the best thing, it would be great for business for me. It would be really bad for business for the tax authorities, because they realize they can't get at you. So it would open.
They actually can't afford to lose a case if they come.
No, they can't.
They can't, and they can't win. So
no. And then the other part of all this is, and you've probably heard this said, and most middle class people don't understand this. When they talk to people like me or you, they're like, well, this can't be legal. Mm. You need to understand there are 2 sets of laws in every Western country. There are the laws for the extremely wealthy, which they take advantage of, and they have been taking advantage of for hundreds of years in the case of European countries. And then there are the laws for everybody else. And until we started learning about offshore trusts and offshore LLCs and how you can legally do all this, the majority of us stay in the laws for everybody else, where they have control. The people that have power, that have money, that have control, they've been using this other set of laws that they don't make us aware of. They have been there for centuries. They are 100% legal, but they don't teach us how to use them, because we're the ones that pay their way.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, there's nothing illegal about setting up a foreign trust, at least not yet, right? I don't know how they would make it illegal, but
they will never make it illegal, because the people in power are the ones that take advantage of it.
Are the ones who need it, right? Like they're using it too. Yeah, exactly. So, who knows what kind of, I expect things to just get bonkers at some point here. I'm just reading through my questions here. Case law that proves a foreign trust. We've already talked about this, right? Yeah. It's, the US can't even afford to lose a case. And when they look at breaking somebody's trust in Belize, it's such a nightmare scenario, even for the government to do it. Right. I try to think of scenarios. Obviously, we know the United States government will violate the sovereignty of other nations. That has been made abundantly clear to us at this point. Yeah. But again, unless you're actively trying to do something to sort of poke the bear, there's no real reason that anybody should come after you. And if they do, what they're going to find is a real stone wall of trouble to try to get to anything that belongs to you.
Yeah.
One other question? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to loop back around to something when we were talking about people in power with trust. If you think of the Prime Minister of Canada, he's often referred to as a trust fund baby.
That's right.
He's never had a quote unquote job short of a part-time gig in a high school.
Right.
Yet, he has lived a very lavish, expensive life. Well, where'd the money come from? Well, it came from a trust. So do you think there's any chance that the Prime Minister of Canada is going to allow legislation that's going to take money away from him? It's not going to happen.
No. But the creativity, thinking like a criminal here, the creative ways that they could try to make sure that, oh, well, you didn't qualify for this trust because this paperwork, I don't know exactly how, because of course none of this has anything to do with the Canadian government. You're essentially setting up a business in Belize, and you have a business agreement with the owners of the trust, or the trust company. And so it's all very straightforward. I'll tell everybody how you can get a hold of Richard. If this setup makes sense, if what we're saying here makes sense, it's very easy to get this done. The two questions: first of all, what doesn't go into a trust? And then the other one, following my line of thinking, is how fast can you get this done? You told me, and I was shocked. Even I didn't know that it could be done that quickly. So what doesn't go into a trust, first of all? And then if I said, I want to hire Richard and get this done today, how long before I'm really done and sort of protected in a sort of good, sort of best case, worst case scenario?
Yeah. So things that you can't put directly in are so first off, real estate that's in a different country. You have to, that's where the other LLC comes in. So you can't put the real estate in, but you can put the real estate in a domestic LLC, and you can move that LLC in. So that you can do it that way. That gives you the advantage that now your name doesn't show up. So if somebody wants to do a search for, a real estate search for all the property that Tane Nix owns in the United States, there is none.
There is none. Yeah, that's right.
So, and there's a key piece to that a lot of people miss, is they'll go on to an online site to form an LLC. They'll do it in the wrong state, which now means that when you filled out the form, your name is on the person. Your name is showing that you, even though you're not you're not the member or the manager, but you're showed as the person that created it. Yeah. So they'll trace you that way.
And the other one is when you create an LLC, since you're bringing it up, when you create an LLC, a domestic LLC, how do you not show that you're the one doing it?
You get someone else to do it for you.
Just get somebody else to set up for you.
Yeah. So for example, like today, we formed 3 US LLCs for a client, so that it shows me as the one that formed it, actually, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we'll do the transfer. I'm out. But now, when someone does the search, the new name doesn't show. Only mine does.
Yeah.
They're not looking for me, which is fine.
These are the kind of tips. I just want to point this out. If you're going to set up asset protection trust, a foreign trust, which is the only kind that we recommend here at Expat Files, and that is very necessary. If you live in the US, if you live in Canada, you have to appreciate the danger that anybody with money is in danger right now from political risk, right? The government is going to be desperate for money. Somehow the whole thing is still grinding along and people aren't really still aware. But as people wake up, as the government really understands, the whole money printing thing has really got us in a bind. You're going to have this stuff set up, which means you need an expert who really knows how to do this. And Richard is, these are the people that I trust. Richard is tied to my attorney, who also was a mentor to me in this, and that I was very, very happy that I found him when I did. And so you want somebody who knows these little tips. Here's how you set up your LLC. If you need to do this, do it this way. So if you can always create an LLC and put something in it. Foreign real estate, right? I imagine like precious metals account. Maybe you got gold and silver at a vault somewhere, right? You can do that. Brokerage accounts, yes.
Brokerage account, again, same situation. You want to put that, you want to have that in an LLC.
Okay.
And in my case, I do not have any brokerage accounts in Canada. They're
Okay.
all external.
And so you use foreign brokers
Yeah,
as well.
so we use a foreign LLC with a foreign brokerage, which also makes opening a bank account far easier,
Yep.
especially for Americans, because
Mhm.
as an American, it's almost impossible to go and open a foreign bank account. But if you're an American that owns an LLC that is in that country, no problem. Now it's
That's
easy.
exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, so those are all things that you know that you wouldn't want to put, because it literally it shines a light on your offshore asset protection when you do it directly. So you need that buffer in between to give it the insulation.
Very good. Very
And
good.
yeah, and the other thing that you wouldn't put in, so anything like commercial real estate, that kind of thing, or if you have
Would not go in, or would go
would
in.
not, yeah, would not go
Would
in.
not go in. Yep.
Not through an LLC, or if you have things like a 401k, or in Canada it's an RSP, same type of vehicle, those
Mhm.
cannot be put in either, but they are protected on their own. So you
They're
don't need
protected
to.
in a different way, maybe, right? But at least, right. But yeah, I mean, basically, and I talked to Rob about this too. Everything goes in there. Your home in the United States, we have what's called a homestead clause. If you get sued, they can't kick you out of your house. I mean, you're allowed to live someplace, right? Because it creates a bigger problem if you're out of your own house. So your home is protected. Like I have a house here in the Caribbean, it's protected 100%. But damn near everything else can go into your trust, right? You just have to set up the proper LLCs that then go into the LLC and the trust. So it sounds like it's tedious, but it's actually not. A lot of this stuff, you told me how long it takes to do this, like start to finish. You could actually have this whole process more or less. And I don't know anybody who does it this fast, but you told me, right? This whole thing could be done in how fast?
And if it's not particularly difficult, a couple weeks is
A couple
you know is
weeks.
is it is
Yeah.
pushing it. Three. If you said 3 weeks to a month, it's done. It's ready to go, and it's
Yeah.
not. And this was the part about when I was trying to walk through this myself. I was getting quotes, for dollar wise. I got one that was into 6 figures, and I'm like, it can't be that much.
To
I
set up
just
a trust? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm
What are
like,
you guys doing? Yeah.
and I come back and it was like, and it's gonna be 6 figures. It's gonna take a year and a half. I'm like, there's something wrong here, and
Something's going
it's
on. You got the
and
sacrifice. Yeah.
yeah, and it was 10 times what it should be,
Yeah. Right.
and that's the reality of it, and it shouldn't. The longest piece usually for most people is the time it takes for us to go through the documentation with them, because we go through, in the case of a trust document, you could be talking 50 pages to
Yeah.
get all of the clauses that you want in it. You cannot, and at least I've never met anyone that can. I can't do it, to go physically through that entire document in one sitting.
You
It's
have
it's
to
just
do
it's
diligence
it's
on
too
it.
much information to go
That's right.
through it.
And you got to sit and actually understand what you're reading and think it through. And like everybody should read
Yeah.
every document. Like this is serious business. It's why you want serious professionals doing it. But I also, just so people understand, a lot of what actually takes time is you have to FedEx documents physically, right? This is not all done electronically. You got to have
No.
wet signatures. It's got to go to Belize, right? In this case, or wherever the trust is located. So there's some turnaround time. Like stuff
Yeah.
doesn't always happen quickly in other parts of the world. Like the guy's on vacation until Wednesday, so we can't get his signature until such and such. I mean, that kind of stuff is normal in other parts of the world. So taken all together, it's not even that it takes maybe it's even less than 3 weeks, but you have this turnaround time and you have some delays that are just sort of built into it. But the fact that you could be truly bulletproof, right? To the highest degree of safety and security for your wealth on planet Earth during this lifetime within a couple of weeks. And obviously for my listeners too, Richard has been very generous. We set up a really special deal. If you're a fan of Expat Files and you're catching this, I'll give you a way to reach Richard through this podcast. I just say that you mentioned the podcast and you got a really, really great discounted price on getting all of this done. And Richard will walk you through. He needs to actually talk to you as well to make sure exactly what it is that you need, but you get a special discount as a member of the Expat Files. So I don't want to cut you off, but I also want to keep these lessons short, Richard.
Yep.
Talk to me about, I mean, first of all, it's been unbelievably valuable. This is such good stuff for people. This is the one thing that I wanted everybody to know, because in some ways we're saying, like, this is the most important thing you can do, and you don't have to leave home. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just start doing this right away. It's very, very valuable to just put your wealth out of the reach of anybody who wants to come after it. And this is how you do it. You could pick up the phone and actually get started on it, like today or tomorrow, depending on when you're watching this. I just want to ask also, before I get to the last question, you know, it really does look like the West, and the US in particular, are really headed into a nightmare scenario. I don't want to keep harping on this, but it is partly what we want to make people aware of here is, and not even in terms of pessimism, but like, be hopeful. Good times are going to come again, right? A new day will dawn, but there's a lot of nonsense that's going to have to get washed out before the sort of news cycle begins. Give me your opinion. I mean, you don't have to sign anything in blood here, but what are the most likely scenarios going forward? I mean, what is a person, an individual, especially to do other than a trust? I mean, let it rip. I mean, what do you see happening? You talk to a lot of people who are in this world of trying to protect themselves from what's coming. What do you hear other people saying, and what do you actually personally think is coming?
Yeah. So I look at what, and I'll be frank, what people that are a lot more versed in this, that have a lot more money than I have, I look at what they're doing, and then the majority of them will tell you why they're doing it. They all kind of see the same thing, that the trend is not going to reverse for the foreseeable future, and for them the foreseeable future is 20 plus years. Like, we're not talking months. They look in decades. So they're looking at where do we want to put our money? Where do we want to put our assets? Given the environment that is happening right now, what are we willing to leave behind? And that's the big one. And the majority are not willing to leave very much.
Yeah.
So they are looking at, they might be, like me in Canada. They're moving assets offshore into multiple jurisdictions because it's, you get talk of, for example, before Boris Johnson stepped down, where he said, if you've got any kind of criminal conviction, we may take your passport away. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't want to say, well, I'm going to move half of my wealth to the UK. Well, you might move 10% of your wealth to the UK, but you're probably going to put 10 or 15% in Singapore and another 10 or 15% in Dubai, and moving things around so that if any one jurisdiction goes squirrely, for lack of a nicer term, yes, you're not, and that's the problem with most Americans. They've got all their money, they figure they're diversified because they're in 5 US banks. That's not diversified.
You're not diversified against your number one risk, which is political risk. Yeah, you have no diversification at all. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So they're in my case, I have sold all my Canadian property. I no longer have property in Canada. It doesn't make sense for me right now to do so because it doesn't cash flow, for one. It will if you pay for it in full, but I look at my return on investment. Well, why would I want to take a 2% return on an investment in a property in Canada when I can get 5 times that in Asia?
That's right.
And
that's the other thing. I mean, it's not for this podcast, but it's something that, since you bring it up, residential rental real estate, like foreign real estate in some of these developing parts of the world, is silly right now. I mean, we're up 30% on a property that's not even built yet in Mexico. That's how fast these places are growing, because what's happening as sort of like the great awakening occurs, and people with money in North America and Europe look and they're like, well, we're not staying here, right? We see the writing on the wall. And so where are the havens? This is why I started Expat Files, to tell people about these little pockets of freedom and liberty and freedom-minded people who are kind of like us. Like, they really want to see things to continue to thrive, like free markets, and we want to have free speech, and right, all of that is possible, but it's happening in places that nobody heretofore has really thought that it's happening. So, my focus is the Americas. I have another property in Central America. I'm up 80 times my money. My original investment was, pittance, and, after 22 years now, and I lived there. I essentially lived there for free, and then got paid a big paycheck at the end of it, which is unbelievable. But those kinds of deals it's not rare. It's not unusual. It's happening all over these developing parts of the world, because these places are going up as the US and Canada continue to struggle and sort of shoot themselves in the head, right, with the policies that the authorities continue to implement and promote. So right, real estate.
That was the one thing that me getting the trust in the LLC out of Canada did for me, was it suddenly it now opens your eyes to, wait a minute, I do not have to stay in Canada. I have all these other options available. So we're looking at residents outside of Canada for tax reasons. Investments, and so businesses will be in one country, trust and LLC will be in a different country, and in my case, Belize. My residents will be in a totally different country again, because you can take all these different pieces and mix and match them to fit your personal needs. And that was the biggest thing that came out of me saying I'm going to do a trust in an LLC in Belize, is all of a sudden it now opened all these other options for me, as opposed to just being in Canada.
Yeah. And there are so many good options in the rest of the world too. The last thing, maybe we've covered this already. What are the 3 biggest mistakes that you see when people go, oh, I know we talked about, I'll get a domestic trust. It's like, yeah, but you're not protected at all. Creating your LLC the wrong way, right, where then it still leads an easy trail back to you. What are some of the really big, maybe it's not 3 things, maybe we've covered enough, but bring it home for us here.
So I've done all of these. So as I said, with the when I did the domestic asset protection with wife 2 to protect me from wife 1, I signed documents without knowing what I was signing.
Big mistake.
That was a huge mistake. Had I actually, and again, I trusted my lawyer. It turns out he was not trustable. And and that, shame on me. That's 100% on me. I don't ever sign a document unless you understand every single clause that you're signing.
That's right. Yep.
That's the biggest one. The other one I see are people that set up LLCs and then do things that make it so that the LLC is effectively useless. In other words, there's no operating agreement. They commingle their funds. They do things that courts pierce with no problem at all. It's like he's using, for example, one person, he didn't become a client. He had to clean some things up before he could. He lived in California, had a trust in LLC in Nevada, and the trust owned a property in Nevada that his business resided in, rent and rental agreement free, and then commingled the funds with his personal funds.
Yeah, which you cannot do. Yeah, anybody can do that.
It's useless. Yeah. So that's the second one, is not you're buying legal protection, but you're not doing the things you need to do in order to actually make it work.
To get legal protection. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a good place to stop and really leave people with that thought. Like, I hope you take from this, because this is a miniature masterclass that Richard has done. And thank you very much for being on.
Oh, my pleasure.
You don't have to do any of that. You don't need any shenanigans. You don't need to do anything questionable or obscuring your funds and making it hard for the government to find. The government's going to find it, I promise you. You don't need to do anything shady. You don't need to do any shenanigans of any kind, because if you just follow the rules, the best thing is exactly what Richard and I have been talking about, which is set up a foreign asset protection trust, hire somebody you can trust, pun intended, and really follow the law, follow the rules. It's perfectly acceptable, and it's good enough to protect you the way that the mega rich are protected. This is how they also set themselves apart from, right, the regular laws that other people think they have to follow. This is so important right now. Like, I'm begging people listening to this, like, set up a foreign trust. do it today. Like call Richard, like book right away. Make sure, like tell him you saw it on a podcast, you'll get a special discount. And this is really how you make yourself bulletproof. This for us is the keystone on the entire plan. Everything that I teach comes down to like, look, if you can do everything else right, and it doesn't matter if you didn't set up your foreign trust or you didn't set it up correctly. It's that important because it protects you from the number one predator that's really going to be coming after you. And I agree. I mean, I'm sad to hear your prediction also and what other people are saying. We're in for a long, hard road. This is not like, oh, you know, the market will turn and we hit the bottom and now it's going to come back and all the rest. It's going to take pain and it's going to take years to sort out the problems that we've created for ourselves. And it doesn't look like right now, like there's no bottom in sight, right? We're dealing with multiple crises on multiple fronts. That's why you need to put your money in a safe jurisdiction where nobody can get it because you don't even own it. And if they want to come after you, it's practically impossible.
Right.
Beautiful. My friend, thank you again. Contact information will be below. Reach out to Richard and thanks everybody for watching. That's enough out of me. I'll have much more here on the Expat Files. Thanks again, Richard, and take care.
Thanks, Tate.
All right. All the best.